Welcome to History 394, Southeast Asia. This is the lecture for Week 1, Part 1, and I am Dr. Paul Tincuddy, your professor. All photo sources used in this PowerPoint and in all of my PowerPoints are either clip art, Google Images, unless otherwise marked, so everything is according to fair use for educational use. A disclaimer: online classes, because of their very nature, are demanding. They require a great deal of self-discipline and self-motivation. Now, in addition, this is an accelerated 8-week course, so we'll be covering within 8 weeks what we normally would cover in a 16-week course. Because we are not meeting in a face-to-face format, this means that we need to leave the lines of communication open in other ways. Please know that I absolutely love teaching. In fact, I've won a number of teaching awards, including a rather prestigious award from the Greater Cincinnati Consortium of Colleges and Universities, so it's a regional award as well. So I love teaching. I'm here to help you in any way, manner possible if you have questions or concerns. Always feel free to email me at my NKU email address, and I check email messages almost compulsively a number of times a day, or to call my cell phone, and you can be assured that I will get back with you within a very short period of time. Please note that I do not use text messaging. It's not a part of my cell phone contract. Another disclaimer: historically, humankind has sometimes behaved in ways that we would consider by today's standards to be unacceptable. So some of the materials that we use in this class may contain frank language, stark depictions of the human condition, or violent episodes. I've tried to omit these whenever possible, but I'm thinking of two things in particular. One is a film that we're asking you to watch called The Killing Fields about Cambodia. And another one is a book called In the Time of Madness about Indonesia and some of its problems in the late 1990s and early 21st century. And I would suggest that you do the same thing when things get kind of overwhelming, when I'm faced with these kinds of sources. You know, if this material gets a little bit dark, I would suggest pausing, getting away from the movie, or doing something fun, calling a friend, playing a video game, doing something to get your mind off of the dark thoughts and to fill it with happy thoughts. Same thing when you're reading. Just stop the reading, do something else, get back to the reading, and when you do get back to the film or the reading, if you need to, fast forward through things. You know, skim through things. Hit the fast forward button, or when you're reading, skim through things. Get the general idea that we're trying to understand. And if none of that really works, then get a hold of me and we'll discuss maybe some alternatives. Please go to the class Blackboard site, which we'll call the Class BB site, and please download the syllabus and read that thoroughly. And if you have any questions, let me know. We're going to discuss many items in the syllabus. The first thing I want to note is that this class is set up the way I set up most of my classes. It consists of 820 points of assignments, and 20 points are built in, it's kind of self-service extra credit, I call them. The icebreaker is 20 points, and that's merely you introducing yourself, and it's described in the syllabus, to your classmates on a discussion board. So it's a very easy, almost 20 points really freebie, really. And that composes your kind of self-service extra credit, so you want to make certain you do that. 5 critiques of 100 points each, and we're going to go into detailed explanation of those in this lecture. And then 3 tests of 100 points each. And those tests are objective tests. So the critiques are written work, the tests are objective. And for those tests, you can use, if they're open book, you can use your notes, your PowerPoints, your books, you know, other sources. But please don't use one another for those. And because there's this 20 points of extra credit, basically, to get 100% in this class, you don't need 820 points. You would only need 800 points. Unfortunately, the Blackboard gradebook doesn't really understand that, so there might be a point in time where you feel like, hey, I'm getting an A in this class, and Blackboard gradebook says I'm only getting an A-. Well, probably Blackboard gradebook is wrong because it can't figure the system out. But if there are questions or concerns, please go ahead and contact me and we'll clarify things. Maybe someone did make a mistake along the way. Maybe I made a mistake in recording a grade, whatever. So let me know, and please know and don't worry about the fact that when I do final grades, I do them manually. I don't take Blackboard's word at anything. I perform those calculations manually. Now, the most important thing, at least 500 of the 820 points, are the critique essays. So we need to spend a good deal of time discussing those. And what we're looking at is the two-way street of history here. You know, we've got information coming from the past, and we've got our own thoughts from the present, kind of going back to try to meet those thoughts. And so in order to really make it all work, we need to sit down and think critically. That is, we need to try to separate ourselves from our own mental baggage, so to speak, our own culture, our own upbringing. Try to think of things in an objective way. Try to remove the emotion of our own emotions from the situations, from the events in history. And instead, try to do some research, do some reading, and objectively look at things and arrive at some thoughtful conclusions. Now, good critiques in this class have three components. Number one, an introduction, which is a paragraph that would describe your main thesis or theme. Now, when you read all of these critiques, I'm going to, you need to do a few things, and we're going to describe those in general here in a minute. But one of the things that you're convincing me of in this critique is that you've read the material you're supposed to read, and you've also found some additional material on your own. And then once you do that, you're probably going to be doing your reading and saying, boy, I'm really interested in this or that particular topic. And boy, I wish Dr. Tenkate would have talked more about this, or I wish the book would have written more about this, etc. And I want to learn more about this particular thing. It's those I want to learn more about this particular item, event, historical person, whatever, that is going to form your critique. Okay, so let's say, for instance, that we're looking at French Indochina, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, and these were colonies of France at one time. And let's say you do your research and you do your reading and you say, what I really want to talk about are the negative effects of that colonization on Vietnam and what ends up happening in Vietnam when Vietnam is torn by civil war. So your thesis, the thing that you might be concentrating on, the topic in the thesis, would be in that first paragraph. And you might say something like, the French colonization of Vietnam led to negative consequences for the Vietnamese people. Okay? And that's your thesis. That's what you've decided that you're going to do. Somebody else might say, I'm not interested in that at all. I'm interested in religion. I read about religion in Vietnam, or I read about religion, Buddhism in Cambodia, and blah, blah, blah. They might pick something totally different, and that's fine. So, introduction, you state your thesis. The body is where you get the information, several paragraphs of supporting evidence for proving what you want to prove. And the conclusion is just kind of wrapping it up all in a nice little package and repeating what your thesis was. So, as we get to this professional level, let's not use vulgar language or cliches or general encyclopedias for this course. So what can we use as acceptable sources for assignments in this class for our critiques? Well, we can use scholarly books. We can use scholarly journals, like the American Historical Review, which is brought out by the American Historical Association. That doesn't mean that that's about American history. It's actually about world history. It's just brought out by a bunch of American Historical Association members. Or the Journal of Asian Studies, or the Journal of World History. Or feel free to use specialized encyclopedias like the World History Encyclopedia or the Encyclopedia of Asian History, but not general encyclopedias like Britannica, Wikipedia, or Encarta. Not for this class, anyhow. Government documents and websites are usually very good, especially if you want to find some data, CIA Fact Book is a great place to go, for instance. Anything that the CIA or the U.S. State Department has is usually pretty good. You can find some of those through this particular website. Those are especially useful, as you get into modern times, into the late 20th century and then into the 21st century. But we don't want to use .com, .edu, .net websites, because some of those can be the .com websites, especially, somebody, and I always use this silly example, that it's somebody who's sitting in his basement who likes the Vietnam War, who has, maybe not even a high school diploma, but has his own .com website on the Vietnam War. We're trying to find things that are more scholarly. And respectable newspapers, magazines, websites, New York Times, The Economist, which is an excellent, it's not just about economic things, but about many other things. All these are good to look at as well. Now, by all means, if you have any questions, is this an acceptable source or not an acceptable source, please feel free to contact me and I'll be able to clarify that for you. Now, in some classes, you've probably used footnotes or endnotes. Footnotes usually appear at the bottom or foot of a page. Endnotes usually appear at the end of a paper. For this class, we'll be using something different called in-text notes. And they're really easy, and they really give you all the information right there and make it very clear. So let's say you're taking this kind of passage here, and you're trying to summarize this and incorporate it, paraphrasing it in your own words, for the paper. And you're saying some very specific things about the population of Asia, from 1750 to 1900. So these aren't commonly known things. These aren't things that are at the tip of your tongue that you and I know walking down the street. These are the things that we find in sources and in our research, and so we need to cite them, because they were someone else's information. They weren't the information that we came up with. So we need to cite them, and how you do it with an in-text footnote is just like this. You give the last name of the author, in this case McKay, skip a space, put the year of publication, a comma, and the page number you found it on. And note that it's all put within parentheses. It's that easy. Of course, this kind of shortened version of a footnote, which we call an in-text note, does not give you all the other information that you're going to eventually want to know, like the author's first name, where was this work published, what city, what publisher published it, etc. So for that, we have at the end of the paper a bibliography. Now, for this class, we want you to use Chicago, which we also call Turabian style. And a free program is available to assist you with correctly formatting those bibliographic references. Now, please note that you can go ahead and do this manually. You can do a bibliography manually if you like. And I give examples of how to do that in slides later on in this lecture. You can do it with the help of something like Microsoft Word, which has a feature that enables you to make bibliographies in Chicago style. Or you could go to this really cool free citation machine website. Now, when you go to that website, they're going to ask you, do you want to use Chicago style? Do you want to use Turabian style? Really, it's the same thing almost. Let's just choose Chicago style. Now it's going to ask you another question. What are you citing? A book, a magazine, a newspaper, like a journal article? And we're going to say a book. Now you can, if you have the book in front of you or notes from it, you can put the first name, last name, book title, volume if it's a multi-volume work, like 3, 4 volumes, whatever volume you use. Edition, is it the 4th edition or whatever, the city where it was published, the publisher, the year it was published, etc. Or you could just see if you can find that in WorldCat. So let's put in a nice author like Dr. Tenkate, yours truly, and see if it found a whole bunch of things in World Catalog. And the first one it lists is the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky. So let's say you use that, so we're going to select that. And by the way, you'd say, oh, an Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky. Yes, it's a specialized encyclopedia. So those are specialized encyclopedias you could use for your critiques in this class, although I really seriously doubt if the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky is going to help you, other than the fact that it has a entry on the Vietnam War and on people who served in the war from this area. Well, so you put that in, and you note that it has filled in all the spaces for you. That's amazing. So you hit the Make Citation thing, and here's your citation. It says it's your citation. And you notice it's all in the proper format. I'm going to block it, and I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to put it right in to my paper. It's that cool. It's that easy. Now, this is the rubric that is given in the syllabus, and this is the rubric that I will use to grade your papers. So let's look at this rubric. And note that it has 15 points here. So this first column is taking the assigned readings and being able to understand them and to relate them to their time period. So this one is essentially, this column, to be frank with you, really is convincing me that you've read the assigned readings and you've understood them. Now, by convincing me that you've read the assigned readings and understood them, that doesn't mean that you need to summarize them all in great detail. You can do that in a very quick fashion. This next section is 30 points. That's a lot of points. So what does that say? That says we're going to investigate other sources. So this is where you go look for a source that was not assigned to you. And again, I've clearly delineated which sources you can and cannot use. And then you want to prove to me that you know how to use a footnote, an in-text footnote. So you want to have at least one of those, and you definitely want to have for every critique of bibliography. So that's 30 points. This shows me that you can take the assigned readings, the outside stuff that you find, the research, and you can think about them in an objective, impartial manner, understand them, pull out questions and arguments in them, and you might even have questions as to why this particular author or authors didn't discuss this or this or that. So this is the critical thinking component. So this is the, have I read what I'm supposed to read, the assigned readings, have I understood them and thought about them, and can I convince Dr. Tenkate that I've read them? And here it says, can I find other sources on my own? And when I do I know how to use an in-text footnote and how to do a bibliography? And this one says, now when I do that, can I think about these assigned and scholarly sources in a objective kind of manner and formulate questions about them and uncover what may have been left out? And then this is big 2 over here, 40 points. And that's just the kind of grammatical number of words thing. So at least needs to be 900 words. Submit it on the Blackboard site. There's always links for this. Each has to have a theme, an introduction, a body, conclusion, and it has to have proper grammar, because if things don't have proper grammar, it detracts from what we're trying to say. And I just want to say one thing very quickly about this. I've sat on many committees. I've hired many people on, not only in education and when I was department chair and so forth, but I've also sat on boards of nonprofit organizations and hired people for museums, etc. And it's really important to have proper grammar and proper spelling. So when people, send in resumes and applications for jobs and so forth, generally sometimes you'll get hundreds of applications. And the first way that you kind of whittle those down and come up with just a dozen or so is to go through, and everybody does this, and say, this cover letter and this resume were really poorly written, and they have a lot of grammatical errors and poor spelling, and so those get thrown out right away. So by emphasizing proper grammar and spelling, we're not trying to be torturous or pedantic. We're trying to help you in what is the next stage of your career. Now, critiques are usually due on Sundays by 11:59 p.m. That is 1 minute before midnight. That's the way the Blackboard system operates. Or is specifically noted in the assignment section of the syllabus. Now, each week I have weekly lesson folders, so all of this is clearly outlined for you. But again, if you have any questions, let me know. And critiques need to be submitted in the links in a Word or an RTF file. You are always welcome to work ahead and to submit things in advance. If you want me to read the critique over before you submit it on the Blackboard site, you can email it to me and ask me to read it. I'll proofread it for you. I'll give you suggestions. Always happy to do that. And I will not deduct any points for late assignments. So please know that in an 8-week course like this, where all of you are mature students who know what you're doing, the due dates are meant to help and guide you and keep you on track in a kind of structured manner. I know that life happens. I know that many of you have, full-time jobs, maybe children, parents or others to take care of. Things happen, and so sometimes you may not be able to get in that critique on time. If you don't worry about it. Get it in as soon as possible. And if you need to discuss with me anything, why it's late or whatever, if you feel somehow obligated to do that, many people do, feel free to get a hold of me. And if you need further guidance for this, on the class Blackboard site, there is an example of a model critique, okay? And also there's this lecture, as well as you can always email me or call me. Now, I think most of you have been introduced to what plagiarism is, and you can read this over yourself. If you are using something from a book and you're quoting it word for word, verbatim, that quote needs to be put in quotation marks and cited in a footnote. If you're paraphrasing another person's very unique ideas, something they've spent years researching, you need to credit them in a footnote. If you're using another person's tables or graphs or photographs, you need to credit them in a source reference, just like you'll see me crediting my graphs and maps and so forth in this presentation. If you never really want to use any other student's paper or presentation, even if that student approves, and in fact nowadays with these Blackboard sites and the way we have assignments, those can be checked, so you don't want to do that. And you don't want to use a free essay website or anything else, because the system also checks all of that when you get your papers in. So, how do you avoid plagiarism? Well, if you were doing a word-for-word verbatim quote of this, you would put it in quotation marks and you would put a footnote. In this case, I put an old-fashioned footnote. Of course, you can use in-text footnotes for our class. And ... means there's more there, I just haven't quoted it all. Now, if you're using a very long quotation like this, then somebody along the way said, you really need to put this in a block quotation. Now, that's dependent upon your professor, but it usually means that you would take this and single space it. Quotation marks in this case are not needed because the single spacing tells you that this is a long verbatim quote. And you would indent the entire quote about a ½ an inch on the left-hand side and include a footnote. So this is an example of a verbatim long quote that's used as a block quotation. And the reason why they do this is, otherwise students might be tempted just to have their paper consist of one string of long quotations after another. And this kind of prevents that and shows you that, hey, I can't really do that. I need to paraphrase things whenever possible. If you paraphrase stuff that's not generally known facts or statistics, you need a footnote. Generally known or widely disseminated information is not stuff that you would need to footnote. So everybody pretty well knows Christopher Columbus sailed to America in 1492, that Mother Teresa was a great humanitarian, that President Kennedy was assassinated in November 1963. You get the drift. If it's very well known, you don't need to footnote it. Graphs, maps, if you didn't make them yourself, you need to put the source for them. So, where do we go for trustworthy sources? Well, I'm going to show you one way you can find trustworthy sources just by what your tuition dollars buy, and that is the Steely Library at NKU has a number of wonderful digital sources available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you pay for them in your tuition, so you might as well use them. Usually you have to log into the Steely Library databases, and you would use your username and password. And then you can go to things like off the regular nku.edu website. They usually have something called Library Steely in the drop-down menu. When you go then to W. Frank Steely Library, you'll usually see something like Research Help or Research Guides. So here, you just keep clicking until you find what you need. And then they'll actually have things like under the topic of History World History. And you'll find a number of options there. And if you can't find what you need, Alan Ellis is the professor who covers history in the library. He's the librarian who specializes that, and he'd be able to help you. Well, they actually have e-books that you can find. And you might say, Dr. Tenkate, I have a full-time job and a son or a daughter. I don't have time to read a book. If you go to this e-book, maybe you're only going to read a chapter of the book, right? You're not going to read the whole book. You can read a chapter of the book, okay? Maybe that would help you. They also have humanities e-books. You could also look for journals, A to Z. And you could put the journal name in there, or you could put the source that has the citations that you'll need to find a particular article. Now, in the humanities, in history, one of those things is JSTOR, and it helps you find articles and so forth in history and in the humanities, and JSTOR stands for Journal Store. Well, we could go and look up the Habsburg Dynasty, which, by the way, has nothing to do with this class. This is just part of my example. So you could go ahead and type in under JSTOR the Habsburg Dynasty. If you wanted to, you could say, I only want to get content that I can access, and I only want journal articles, say, between 1990 and 2013, and you can tell it all kinds of things. You can do whatever you like here. It's up to you. It's not really, up to me. But just doing what I did there, I found 2,216 articles. And let's say you don't want book reviews. Well, you can tell which things are book reviews and which things are articles. You can actually see from all of this that this article is available in a PDF file, so you can download it right away as a PDF and read it. And sometimes the first page has a bibliographic citation, and you can rework that and put it in Chicago style. So you can download these, print them. You can do highlight them, get bibliographic citations from them as well. So other databases that might be useful, not only JSTOR, but Academic Search Premier, Project Muse, these will help you find academic journal, essays. And there's JSTOR, so you can go through it, you can find it. There's always half a dozen ways to find these things. You can type in JSTOR, you can look under the J of databases. And then one thing which is really useful, maybe not so useful for this class, but might be useful for some of your other classes in the future, is WorldCat. We already saw a little bit about WorldCat. WorldCat stands for World Catalog, and it is totally amazing. So let's say you're in another class and you need to do some research. Well, you can use WorldCat, and let's say you're trying to find, we're just going to pick on the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky again. Now, we know we have that in the library, but let's say somebody's checked it out and you really need it. Well, you can actually go in and see that there are like 120 some libraries in the world that have this, and sometimes they list them in different ways. You can read that over there. And you could get SourceFinder here at NKU to get a copy for you. So, you know, there's a SourceFinder, and SourceFinder gets books through interlibrary loan. And that's a really cool thing, too. So what's a bibliography look like? So now you've got your sources. You know how to find your sources. If you have any questions on that, ask me. A bibliography is at the end of your paper, and it's a list of your sources used, and it includes important information like the author's first and last name, the title of the book, the place of publication, the publisher of a book, the date of publication. And note that a bibliography goes alphabetically by the author's last name. If there are two authors that have the same last name, then it's going to go by the author's first name. So Jane Doe would come before John Doe. Oh, and now if John Doe wrote 2 articles, now it's going to go by whether it's got to go to the next thing. So M comes before T. So this is the way that we alphabetize bibliographies. You need to use Chicago, also called Turabian style. You'll find, again, a way to do that either through the citation machine, through Word, Microsoft Word, or if you prefer, you can do it the manual way, the old-fashioned way, by referring to all of these examples where I show you where to put what for different things. For a book with multiple authors, a dissertation, an article, a website, a book review, a manuscript, interviews by you. When in doubt, get a hold of me. So that's all for this lecture. We have week 1, part 2, and you need to download that as well. Have a good day. And if you have any questions, get a hold of me.